My name is Melissa Chan. Thanks for joining us both online and in person. We are in conversation with Ukrainian journalist Sev Musaieva, editor-in-chief of Ukrainska Pravda, which translated means Ukrainian truth. Welcome to RightsCon. Just some quick housekeeping. As usual, post your questions on Slido. I get to them pretty quickly if you post them. So there's no question and answer period at the end. We'll try to integrate the questions into our discussion. Now, just a little bit more about Sev. She is originally from Crimea, and this is important because you are Tatar, an ethnic group that faces persecution in Russia-controlled Crimea. And about your newsroom, it reaches more than 4 million people every day at home and abroad, serving as a source on the war. In addition to what's happening on the front, your team of journalists have followed the money to track down Russian billionaires' yachts and planes around the world. And for this kind of work, you have received death threats and other kinds of threats to your journalists. 2 of your publication's previous senior editors were murdered. Last year, Sev made Time's top 100 influential people list, and in 2019, you were a Harvard Nieman Fellow, and you've, of course, received numerous journalism prizes in Ukraine. Sev, thanks again for joining us.
Hello, nice to meet you. Hello, Melissa.
So let's just start by asking you about some of the big stories out of your newsroom in recent months.
The biggest story now, of course, this is dam in Kherson. Maybe you heard about this. And this is a story we leave last 2 days, actually. Sleep with that 24/7. 2 of my colleagues went to Kherson that was under occupation for several months. And now Ukrainian army on November 3rd, Kherson. And now Kherson is flooded by water, and they reported from this place, but also they help with the evacuation of people and animals. And this is something is about journalism and about newsroom too during this 16th months of the war, because you don't have a chance just to do your work, just to report the stories from frontline, from such cities as Kherson, stories about war crimes against Ukrainians, but you also need to help. You also need to be a volunteer. And your conference is about human rights, and now Ukrainian journalists became a human rights defenders in their country. And the best way how they can do that, they just definitely evacuated those people from flooded houses and flooded city.
Yes, because as a journalist, you're supposed to be, the myth is that you're supposed to be dispassionate and an observer, but if you're watching human suffering, there's the humanity of just being not just a journalist, but a human being to try to help others, and I can totally understand that. How do you, as editor-in-chief, sort of remind your journalists about trying, I don't want to say trying to stay dispassionate, but for example, if you find something, a lead on government malfeasance, government corruption in Ukraine, that could potentially, the country needs to be united. So how do you sort of navigate the need to continue to be accountable to the government while also wanting to support the overall efforts of the war?
Thank you for this question, and it's important, of course, to answer this question, and I will try to do my best with that. With the beginning of the war, of course, we reported 24/7 breaking stories from the front line, and then maybe last summer we understood that corruption, this is something that not disappeared just after the beginning of the war. And I think in my newsroom we had this discussion, and totally support that statement that it's even more necessary to report about corruption when your country fights for the right to exist, and when your country fights for the right to be democratic state, to be transparent state, and to be a European state. That's why your work is more responsible, is more important, because during the war we lost human lives, we lost our civilians, we lost our militaries. That's why we have to keep going, and we have to cover even misconducts of our officials and etc. So from last summer, we reported about such stories. We published some stories about high official corruptions, for example, deputy head of the presidential office, one of the governor in frontline city, members of parliament from servant of the people. And what I want to say, after we published the stories, already 6 people were fired after our investigations. So it's about also public service during the war, and it's about continue to do your job, continue to do the work. Of course, we have even among all media landscape in Ukraine discussion. Is it the right time to do such stories? This is the right time to do such stories because we want our country not only to be independent, but to be successful and to be prosperous. And that means that it should be country without corruption and without misconduct. And this is our job, and this is our front line during this week.
Now, that is something that your newsroom journalists understand, but do you get a sense that ordinary Ukrainian citizens also understand the need for this kind of bad press about the government, that it's part of this process of being transparent?
We received a huge support from our readers and from people. They actually supported us in these stories. And actually, after publishing the stories, also why those people were fired, because it was a huge public scandal, and of course told that during the war, such stories are inappropriate, and we don't want them to happen anymore. That's why it's important, and that's why also I want to say that last poll showed that more than 85% of people supported journalists for publishing such stories, for publishing and for covering corruption issues, for anti-corruption investigation, etc. So we have a huge support from our people. We also have a huge support from our militaries, which is also important. So after publishing such stories, we received the messages from our friends who became soldiers, who became who now fighting in the ranks of Ukrainian army, and they told us, okay, thank you for your job, because we do our job, and you need to continue to do your job and your activity against these things.
That brings to mind a question I asked our last interview. In the last interview I did, which was also with a journalist, but from Kenya, which is the business model, right? The Ukrainian economy has suffered terribly as a result of this invasion. And I imagine it's the same for newsrooms. Even before the war, it was probably difficult to continue to report and come up with new business models in a very changed environment, right, of social media. How are you managing to do that? How are you fundraising? Are you getting support from citizens? And what are your thoughts about future models that might work?
Thank you again. Yes, our business model before the war was absolutely different from what we have now. Before the war, we received 60% from our advertising, from banners, from everything, from Google, and 30% from donors. And no, sorry, it's a mistake. So we received 70% from advertising, 20% from donors, and 10% from our audience, because we launched our Club of Readers in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, and people supported us as well. Now it changed completely. We receive 60% from donors, 30% from advertising, and 10% from our readers. We also receive support from different people abroad. We launched our English version at the beginning of war, 21st of February. And a lot of people abroad supported independent Ukrainian media. We launched our campaign for support for independent media, not only for Ukrainsky Pravda, because for us it's important to support not only our media, it's important to support the whole structure of independent media in our country, because this is one of the key elements of democracy. So now, thanks to donors, thanks to our subscribers, we are able to continue to do our job. Of course, I do believe that after this war will end with the victory of Ukraine, we will be back to our model, and we'll be back to more advertising model, more hybrid model than it's now. But of course, the donor support is very important, and I will again thank to a lot of donors and of course people, subscribers, our patrons who supported us during this very exhausting year.
RightsCon is a conference that functions at the intersection of human rights and technology. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how your journalists have used technology to gather information for stories.
Technology is very important. Like I want to maybe tell you a little bit, speak a little bit about citizen journalism as well, because with the beginning of war, of course, we didn't have an access to all territories because the invasion started from different parts of our country. And thanks to our readers from different regions, we were able to continue to report, for example, from some cities that were under occupation or under Russian siege, for example, even from Mariupol, Berdyansk, and other cities. So here, the story of civil journalism is extremely important, and it helped us, professional journalists, from the first days of war. Also, it's all very useful with investigations because we investigate. Of course, we do investigations. Not the major part of our investigation now dedicated to Russian war crimes and war crimes that Russia committed in Ukraine. And with these investigations, of course, we don't have an access to people, to Russian soldiers, but we are able to find their personal data in social media. We're able to use all OSINT tools to recognize those people, to find these people, and it works effectively. So we did a lot of investigations thanks to our to technologies and to social media and to OSINT tools. And I think that in future we will find the new one because, for example, one of the main topics now is the deportation of kids from Ukraine to occupied territories and. From the temporary occupied Crimea in Russia. And we found some of such examples of deportation of kids even 2 days ago, for example, and thanks to social media, Russian social media. And I hope that with the help of our partners, we will be able to investigate this, and we will be able to provide help to our kids, and it will be also useful to return them back to Ukraine.
On the flip side, can you talk a little bit about protecting your journalists with technology, from technology? In other words, I imagine that there are aggressive attempts from Russian hackers to access your systems, to access your staff's phones.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Of course, I will not provide a lot of details because it's kind of a security protocol.
Yeah.
And but it worked with the beginning of war. It was one of the most effective security protocol in Ukrainian media, and I think in all Ukrainian organizations, because before the beginning of invasion, we understood that we will be definitely the target because we are the main source of information for a lot of Ukrainians, and we are independent media in Ukraine. So that's why we did some very important things, and it helped us to continue our work, even a lot of even in situation when a lot of sites of our colleagues, were just hacked by Russians. And I remember how the first days of the war, one of the most powerful attacks in Ukrainska Pravda website was around 200,000 requests per second, and even in such situation, we survived. We saved our website and continued our work thanks to some very clear security protocol, and it was actually Google Shield. It's not secret, and other very important things.
You can't give too many details, but I think the takeaway from your story is that being prepared well in advance is incredibly key to the security of everybody.
Yes, yes, this is important. And even in important countries, a lot of high officials of Ukraine, they promised us that maybe this invasion will not happen. 1 week before the invasion, we relocated the part of our team to the western part of the country, and that's why even in such situation where a lot of people were trying to escape Kiev, we were able to continue our work in this newsroom, small newsroom, like only 6 people worked in Western Ukraine, but still it was very useful, and it helped us in the first days of this war.
Can we now talk a little bit about Russian disinformation? It's been incredibly aggressive, and your newsroom and many other newsrooms across Ukraine have been working hard, and frankly, not even newsrooms, ordinary journalists, ordinary citizens rather, are very active in trying to counter Russian disinformation. How do you see your newsroom's role in all of this?
We live in such hybrid warfare, information warfare already for 9 years, because actually Russia used this propaganda with the beginning of annexation of Crimea and occupation of Crimea in 2014. And I do remember it was actually so how Russian propaganda pictured Ukraine as a Nazist, as a fascist, and it will be a danger for all Crimean people in Crimea. So they pictured, and years and years of demonizing Ukrainians actually helped Russians to start this war against Ukraine in 2022, because Russian people, Russian population, brainwashed by this propaganda, and they do believe that one of the goals of this special military operation, so-called, but it's war, was kind of denazification of Ukraine, demilitarization of Ukraine, and a lot of soldiers, Russian soldiers, when they came to Ukraine and they were captured, they told that, I came here to liberate some Russian-speaking people, and but then I understood that Russian-speaking people didn't want that, so there is nothing to protect them. But by the way, so we experienced that already for 9 years. So we are highly experienced newsroom, and I think that it's about all Ukrainian media. But I will tell you that I want to tell that unfortunately, Russia propaganda is still one of the key elements of Russian diplomacy, and they still spread a lot of disinformation about the war in Ukraine. Even with this situation with the dam, they accused Ukraine, and they shared this narrative that Ukraine is responsible for that. And they lied. They lied that Bucha was staged, for example. They lied that all war crimes in Ukraine were just staged by Western allies and Ukraine, and etc. So. And I think that unfortunately, in a lot of countries, they are successful. Unfortunately, Russia today was able to continue their work till the beginning of war in 2022, and we asked several times why Russia today is still working in your country in 2018 or in 2019. And unfortunately, Russia today is still available in some global South countries in Africa, and it also helps Russia spread all these narratives and fake stories and news. So I'm more worried about the world than about Ukraine, because we know the cost of Russian propaganda. We know how Russian propaganda can affect population, but unfortunately, it's still not a big issue. It's not a big issue for European countries and for the rest of the world.
Right, and on that front, Twitter, Facebook, some of the biggest social media companies out there are American, and they're some of the most harmful in terms of spreading disinformation and misinformation, especially Twitter in the last few months.
We see that, and a lot of Ukrainians reported about that like 24/7, but there is no reaction. And I think that we, like this is so interesting because all professional media, in different countries, they have rules, they have responsibility, but social media, they don't have this responsibility. And platforms, they don't have responsibility, they don't have these rules. And I remember how in 2019, during my year at Harvard, we had this discussion about we should do something with Facebook, we should do something with spreading like disinformation. And actually, after that, so many stories happened in the world. Myanmar, for example, and other, like how it's effective, even with the situation with the war in Ukraine. The disinformation in Twitter, for example, even an embassy of Russian embassy in Britain, Twitter published a story that Mariupol story from this maternity hospital was fake story.
Right.
It took like one day just to delete the story from Twitter. How it's possible in 21st century? So I think that the discussion is necessary. We have this discussion, but we don't have a solutions. And I think like 2023 and 2024 should become a year of solutions. Because we will face with the same situation during elections in the US. In 2024. That there will be a lot of attempts from Russian side with this disinformation and warfare. So I do believe that they are really good with disruption, such things.
Well, you talk about the fact that we need to come up with solutions, but we also need to have a lack of will to do so. And that is something incumbent, frankly, on the governments where most of this technology is based. We do have one question that's come in from someone, and they are asking what are some misconceptions you think either the international community or Ukrainian citizens themselves might have about the context in Ukraine right now?
Very interesting question. Thank you for that. As I understood, clear, it's more about what the world don't take on account about Ukrainian situation, or what?
The question, I think what they mean is, are there any narratives that you feel like you need to counter or correct that people misunderstand about Ukraine? And it can be people outside of Ukraine, but even inside Ukraine, maybe there's some misunderstandings that your newsroom's always pushing to try to clarify.
Yes, thank you. First, I will tell about this. This is the biggest decolonial war in the modern world, and it's important to spotlight this narrative. Saying that this is not something that happened in 2014 or 2022. This is like the long way for our country to be independent. And I think that the colonial narrative is not enough and is not present in Western media, for example, because unfortunately, nobody wants to go back to the history. Nobody wants to learn from the history. Nobody wants to take lessons from history to an account. And that's why even in 2023, after 9 years of war, you still hear sometimes that Crimea was kind of a Russian territory, etc. And, I know the real truth about Crimea because my family was deported in 1944 from Crimea, and I'm from Crimean Tatar community. We are indigenous people of Crimea, and we were deported in 1944, and then Russia settled a lot of people to Crimea. So they changed ethnicity and it was war crime actually. The same situation, for example, with Ukraine, about 5 million people were killed during Holodomor, which was a kind of artificial famine created by Joseph Stalin. And after these 5 million people were killed, again, Soviet Union settled a lot of people to these territories from Russia. So, and that's why we have to understand what is the tipping point of this war. This is not something that happened in 2014. This is something that have roots for years, decades, and even centuries.
I would just add at this point that for anyone interested in learning about the history of Ukraine and how some of these issues go back centuries, I personally recommend Timothy Snyder's set of lectures on the history of modern Ukraine, which is actually posted on YouTube. They're part of his Yale lectures. Sorry about that. I just wanted to mention because it was a personally
and the second one, which narrative is important. Of course, we now have a lot of discussion about peaceful process, like etc. And a lot of people in different countries believe that, for example, tomorrow, when Russia and Ukraine will sign something, it will solve all problems. It's not point anymore, because in this particular case, we need accountability. We need accountability for Russia and Russian authorities for war crimes that were committed in Ukraine, but again, were committed in Georgia, in Chechnya, in different countries for years and decades. This is also about history, but we don't have this narrative now. Accountability, one of the key priorities for this war. Accountability for Putin, for Russia, and for all people who committed war crimes in Ukraine or other countries, because it will end, for example, but then people will be back because they will feel this impunity and they are able to continue their war crimes, and they will be back in decades, etc. So they should pay a huge price just to avoid war crimes and tragedies in future.
Sev, any final thoughts?
I'm really sorry that I'm not in Costa Rica today, but maybe the last one point will be this conference about human rights and about future of human rights. And I think that Ukraine war is kind of tipping point for a human rights issue as well in the modern world. And there is some discussion about why do you support Ukraine, etc. And I want to say that maybe I will end with a quote of our human rights defender Alexander Matvichuk from Civil Liberties Center. She said in her Nobel Peace Prize speech, it's not, you have not to be Ukrainian to support Ukraine. We just need to be human. Don't forget about this. Thank you.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us, Sev Musaieva.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
And to everyone who've joined, thank you so much. As always, enjoy the other sessions, and we'll be seeing you soon. Stay engaged.